Russian troops have seized Europe's largest nuclear plant in southeast Ukraine after a heavy assault by artillery. The shelling caused a fire and triggered worldwide alarm at the prospect of a nuclear disaster, although officials say the site is now safe. It comes on the 9th day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, let's talk some more about this now with Professor Mike Fitzpatrick, who is a nuclear power expert at Coventry University. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us today, Professor. So, Ukraine's President Zelensky calls what's happened an act of terror on an unheard of level. What's your assessment?
OK, I think firstly it is worthwhile emphasising that there has not been significant damage to the nuclear plant, no release of radioactivity, no breach of any of the containment. And this looks like not an attack on the plant itself, but part of the military advance in securing Ukraine's infrastructure. So taking control of things like the nuclear plant that generate electricity. Now, that said, of course, using artillery anywhere near a nuclear plant is massively foolhardy, and there has been damage on the broader site itself to ancillary buildings, probably administration buildings. If one shell had gone astray, then we could be having a very different interpretation of what's happened.
And Russia is now in control of this nuclear plant, with reports that staff are working at gunpoint. What are the implications of Russia being in charge?
Well, what that means now is that they can effectively control the Ukraine electricity supply in that region. So the plant is a very large plant. It has 6 reactors on site. As far as we can tell, not all of them were operating at the time of the attack. Since the attack, more of the units have been taken offline. So it's not clear as to whether any of the reactors on site are still working. But what it means is that if, for instance, one of them is still operating, that Russia can now take that offline and cause disruption to the electricity supply as part of strengthening their hold on the area.
So put into context for us, if you can, how damaging any incident at this plant would be. OK, so it's worthwhile reviewing what sort of plant it is. It's a fairly modern nuclear power plant. It's what's called a pressurized water reactor. And what you have in a pressurized water reactor is the nuclear core, which is where the heat is generated. There's a coolant circuit that takes that heat away from the core to a secondary circuit that then takes the heat onto the turbines that generate electricity. The central pressure vessel in which the nuclear fuel sits is a thick steel cylinder. So that's your first level of containment. Around that, you have all of the ancillary cooling that, as I say, takes the heat away from the core for electricity generation. That sits in a reinforced concrete building on a large reinforced concrete slab. You have multiple levels of containment. So, these plants are very safe. If you do get any disruption to the cooling, they have multiple safety systems, so additional cooling can be injected, and they can even cool passively once the power has been turned off for a certain time. So the danger would have been is if in the attack on the plant that artillery shells could have penetrated the concrete shell, could even have damaged the pressure vessel, or even just caused enough damage to the cooling systems that you could have been in a situation like Fukushima, where even if the plant has temporarily been disrupted and shut down, that the heat that continues to come from the core in the hours and days after it's been shut down couldn't have been removed. So we could have been looking at very serious consequences. Fortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case. And this plant isn't far from Chernobyl, of course, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. How concerning is it that this site is also now under the control of the Russians?
OK, well, it has to be said that Chernobyl was a completely different design, and the circumstances that led to the Chernobyl incident were completely different. Sort of involving, effectively misuse of the reactor, not something that was a consequence of accident or anything to do with military action. I think that the fact that the both are in the Ukraine, sort of does immediately raise concerns in the eyes of the public. Could this happen again? I think that at this stage we can be very reassuring and say that's not going to be the case here.
And if there had been overnight a significant breach of the reactor, that would now be very clear. That's not what's happened.
Professor Mike Fitzpatrick from Coventry University, thanks very much indeed for talking to us today.
Thank you.